Welcome everybody to, I guess this is our last event of the year.
Yeah,
Bringing it home. Exactly.
I'd like to say it went fast, but it went fast and slow.
Fast and slow, I know. My name is Ann Merchant, and I work for the National Academy of Sciences, and I'm joined by.
I'm Rick Lovard. I am the program director of the Science and Entertainment Exchange, a program of the National Academy of Sciences.
Exactly. And so, for those of you who have been with us, and I think our very first event this year was on April 1st, so not long after the Academy sent us to work at home. So, we've been doing a lot of these. And so, we're pretty adept at our introductions and explaining. I guess my job is to explain a little bit about what the National Academy of Sciences is and does before I hand it to you, Rick, to talk a bit about the exchange. So, I feel like I could call upon some of you now. You could probably do this if you've been with us. But the National Academy of Sciences is a private nonprofit institution in Washington, D.C. that was created by Abraham Lincoln. We like to say in the travail of the Civil War, when Abe was pretty busy, but he also understood that the country could really benefit from having a group of advisors who sat outside the framework of government to help guide the nation towards a good set of policies that were informed by science, engineering, and medicine. So the National Academy of Sciences is joined by the National Academy of Engineering and the National Academy of Medicine. And as you might imagine, we've been very busy this year because this is essentially what the Academy was built for. We've been doing a lot of work that is specific to COVID. And so that's been reflected in our programming. It has certainly been reflected in what you see on our website because there's a lot out there for the policymakers and the decision makers. Those are the audiences we often play to most often. And there's been a lot of really valuable information out there, including in the news most often is the framework for the distribution of the vaccine. But we really have a very wide portfolio of work that is reflected on our website. In fact, I was looking today at what is new and what is coming. And so we have a new report that's coming on the prohibition of soaring Tennessee walking horses. So for those of you who know, Tennessee walking horses, they're the ones that are very high stepping. And the practice of soaring, it's to essentially, they do things to the horses to make their feet very sore. And that's why they walk so gingerly. And so we have convened a panel of experts to look at the ways that we should stop doing that because it's not really very humane to the horses. So you can see that while we're very busy on things like COVID, we're also doing other important work in other topical areas. So that's the work of the Academy. But we know that not everybody's reading our big 400-page reports. That's why the Science and Entertainment Exchange exists.
Yeah, so if you are a writer, producer, studio executive, storyteller of any kind in a big media form, like you're writing a book or you're making a TV show or a movie, you have a question about science, you can call our program or email us, and we will connect you with a field expert who will answer your question for free. Now, if you are a STEM professional and you're just hearing about us, please reach out because we're always looking for more field experts to connect to storytellers as well. We've done over 300 events like this one. We've done, well, not all like this one. We used to do it live and in person. There was a bar. It was amazing. But we've also done over 3,200 consults on films like Avengers Infinity War, Man of Steel, Black Panther, Captain Marvel, and Songbird, which is catching a lot of controversy recently. I want to thank Ameche and Dempsey for their help with AV today, closing us out. By the way, for the whole year, really, Ameche, we kind of like threw you into this last April, and you've done a fantastic job. So thank you very much for the whole year. And Dempsey, too. Also to office in DC, Courtney Sloan, who is having a much-deserved ski break, Jeff Fishman and Sachi Gerben here in LA. I also want to really quickly thank our sponsors, Howard Hughes Medical Institute, who made this event happen, this event possible for us, Alfred P. Sloan Foundation, Walt Disney Company, Film Nation, Google, the Lyda Hill Foundation, Corteva, and individual donors like many of you. For everybody who joined at the supporter level this year, it made, normally the coin isn't see-through, but it made a really huge difference. And we sent you one of these, and we're doing some extra programming for you. And thank you. I know not everybody can support, especially in a year like this one at the supporter level, but we really appreciate you doing that.
And so we've made it a little bit of a habit that we talk about some of the personal things that we've been doing. We've called it our rabbit hole. And I did want to mention that the New York Times, I always think they do a wonderful job of this, but they publish their annual year in photographs. And this year, of course, being 2020 is a remarkable year in many ways. And so their photographs are reflectively quite remarkable. And they challenged readers to, because each month they picked a group of photographs for that month, and they challenged readers to go and pick your favorite for each month, or something that resonated with you, so that you ended up with a collection of 12 photographs that said something to you about 2020. So I highly recommend it. It was actually a difficult task because there were so many wonderful photographs, and it was a challenge, but I suggest you do it. And Sachi, I know, has given you that link in the chat.
Well, my rabbit hole item, I was looking for something to do that I could do from my backyard. And so I decided to buy a telescope. And so, as one does, I called an astronomer, Phil Plate, and I said, "Hey, Phil, what telescope should I buy?" And he said, "Don't buy a telescope, buy a pair of binoculars." So I bought these Celestrons at like $100 on Amazon. Yeah. And I'm going to use them with this Sky app and give a try to some home astronomy. We'll see how this goes.
Those are some monster binoculars, I just have to say.
They're huge. I hope my neighbors don't notice that I have them, because I'll look like
Well, I want to know what you're seeing through those binoculars as you look at the night sky. But in the meantime, we've got some things for you to look at. And we were excited to do this event because, I think that through the year, we've been doing some really interesting programming. At least we like to think it was interesting programming. And we've been hearing that from you. And we also were paying attention to what you were talking about and how you were thinking about our programming. And it's not like we can say, oh, this is the best, this is the only, but it was just, there were certain talks that stood out over the course of the year for different reasons. And so we were really happy to invite some people back. As we said, it's kind of our mixtape, it's our encore, because we felt like there was more to say. There was a chapter 2, there was an update, and oftentimes we don't give people a lot of time to talk. So giving them just a little more time to give us a little bit of extra. So we're happy to be able to do that and to end the year in that way, because not everything was horrible about 2020, and there were some bright spots on our virtual stage. So we brought some of those bright spots back. And so I think, Rick, you're going to kick us off with kind of talking about the first person that we're bringing back.
Yeah. So, first of all, one thing I should say, as with any event that we've done this year, if you have a question for one of our speakers, down here, there's a little thing that says Q&A. Click on that, go ahead and ask your question. And I am going to be trying to get as many of them as possible to make sure that there will be a Q&A at the end, so that your questions will hopefully be answered. But for those of you who have seen our speed dating events, we have these people called provocateurs. And in 2020, we had a whole bunch of people take time out of their day to come and just ask some interesting questions. But one person really, really stood out among that group, so much so that we invited him back to be a host, and then eventually called him the host for speaking into the future. So for 2021, Ahmed Best is going to be our host for all speed dating events, because he is fantastic and he's extremely provocative, as you're about to find out. So Ahmed, can you join us on screen for a sec here? There you are. Hi, Ahmed.
Hey.
Provocateur.
How are you guys?
Well,
thanks for having me. Thanks for having me. I appreciate you guys so very, very much. Thank you for letting me provoke you in one of the most wonderful ways. It's great to be here, and it's great to be the most provocative amongst the Science and Entertainment Exchange.
Well, and
Well,
I'm
Ahmed, I think not only in terms of you're not only provocative, I think that you bring such enthusiasm to what you do because you ask so many questions about science from such a place of authenticity because you genuinely want to know. And I think that's
Mhm.
really part of what our audience gravitates to is that they too want to know and you speak for them. And I think that that's been something so wonderful that you've done on our virtual stage. And we really appreciate that.
Thank you.
And Ahmed, since you are so good at moderating and hosting, we are just going to hand this whole event right over to you and get off screen until the end of the Q&A.
Look at that. How about that? Thank you very much. I get to take over. All right, guys. I'll see you in a little bit. Thanks so very much. Yes. Hi, everyone. I can't tell you how excited I am about this. I consider myself a DIY hobbyist scientist. It is some of the most exciting things that I read about, I watch, I learn about is in the science field and using the science process. I take it into my art and use it however I can. And one of the biggest things that I love is not knowing things. I love having to figure out and or find out things that I had no idea about. And hosting these science and entertainment exchange events have been some of the best not knowing and learning experiences of my life. 2020 has been extremely challenging for every single one of us. But much to my, fault, I think I'm a bit of an optimist. And as difficult as 2020 has been, we have these bright spots. We have these moments of humanity that have really shown us our true nature. And coming to every science and entertainment exchange event showed me that the humanity in every scientist that was out there talking about what they were talking about was so incredibly special and at the forefront of their mind. And I always look at science as more of a process than a discipline. And the process of the science really exacerbates and brings out the humanity in all of us. And throughout all of the things that have happened, throughout all of the misinformation, disinformation, denial, science found its way through. Science came through, and regardless of whether or not you believed in it, made itself known, made itself heard, and was a force to be reckoned with, and now is putting us on a path globally to come together and heal. So it's a wonderful, wonderful time to be alive. It's a wonderful time to love science, and it's a wonderful time to listen and talk to scientists. And that's what we're going to be doing today. As you can see, I'm amped, I'm hyped, as we used to say in the 90s in New York, and I can't wait to get cracking. So let's go. The first person we are going to talk to, she has been voted by the exchange as the best date of 2020, and she's going to have her extra 7 minutes of the year to talk to you about how children learn. Her name is Patricia Call. She's the director of the University of Washington Institute for Learning and Brain Scientists. Patricia's played a major role in demonstrating how early exposure to language alters the brain. It has implications for critical periods in development, for bilingual education and reading readiness, for development disabilities involving language, and for research on computer understanding of speech. As someone who used to be a child and someone who has a child, I am always fascinated by what Pat has to say and how we learn. So Pat, I am going to ask you to turn on and unmute yourself so we can experience your lovely wonderfulness. I'm going to hand it over to you for your second 7 minutes of 2020. I appreciate you, and whenever you're ready.
All right. Thanks, Ahmed, and welcome, everybody. It's fun to have a second go at this and to kind of continue the story and tell you what I'm working on now. So I'm a neuroscientist, and I'm very interested in human learning. particularly the learning that goes on in the first years of our lives, because that sets the stage for the rest. One of the things that I've been impressed with the work that I've done, is to recognize the role of the social brain in learning. So here we are in the midst of a pandemic, and what's been removed from all of us is face-to-face interaction. And if you look at the world and think about yourself, your friends, your family, you can see that the kids are suffering because they're not learning online. Many of the school-age kids, the high school kids, are reporting that they're not learning, that they're bored, that they miss their friends. We're also hearing that people are feeling a sense of depression and sadness. So it raises the question, what is it about social interaction that makes it so essential for human beings? I mean, not just the frosting on the cake, but what makes social interaction so critical? So the studies I've done so far suggest that social interaction isn't just a fun, playful, on the side activity that keeps us entertained. It seems to be much more essential to human learning and cognition than we ever thought before. And the evidence for that comes from both studies of babies and studies that I've done since the May presentation I made on the teenage brain. Analyses, we had the data collected, we didn't collect during COVID. The baby studies show that if kids are trying to learn, in the case that I've studied, babies are trying to learn a second language by being exposed to it very, very early, the sounds and the words. We demonstrated in a pretty amazing experiment that babies needed humans talking to them. They needed social interaction in order to learn. Beautiful videos didn't do anything to learning, absolutely flatline. Brain measures, behavioral measures showed no learning. We've now studied teens. Teens are sitting in a brain machine, a scanner. I'll show you a picture of that in a minute. They're trying to learn, and they're playing a computer game, and the learning material is just going along on the side. And in the computer game, they're guessing, but the game is rigged, and so they're getting feedback. They're all learning at about 50%, it suggests. The feedback is either faces, emojis, or thumbs. And we're showing that teenage learning of the irrelevant material, meaning the auditory stuff that's coming along that they're just ignoring, is greatly enhanced when the feedback they get is social. So if it's a face, smiling or frowning, if it's an emoji, smiling or frowning, even thumbs up, thumbs down is a kind of social from Facebook feedback source for kids. Interestingly, the teens learn differently. Girls are very much more responsive to faces than emojis, boys the opposite. But the point is that social feedback, even though it's related to the game and not the syllables they're listening to, influences how much they learn. So we're trying to understand, why is it that scientists have underestimated the power of the social brain? And so we're doing brand new experiments now. So Jeffrey, let's see that slide. Brand new experiments in which we take our big brain machine. So this is a huge $2.5 million magnetoencephalography machine. And you see the little type. This is a totally safe and non-invasive machine. Picks up the magnetic fields, doesn't make any noise, picks up the magnetic fields in the brain and allows you to locate and see a movie of activity as the baby's doing something. And here's mom. Mom is wired in a cap that has sensors on it, not an MEG machine, but second best. And she's interacting with the baby. And we're trying to see, what does the baby brain do as she interacts socially, or she removes that social interaction? So you see her here in the social condition. And what we do at random intervals is have her pick up her phone, turn to the side and start punching on it, or turn to the side and act as though she's talking to someone else. And we record what happens in the baby brain as that takes place. And what we're seeing is that every single baby reacts, kind of shock and surprise when an interacting person, a loving person who's talking and playing with you, suddenly and unpredictably turns to another stimulus, to this phone. Now, in a way, we feel badly about putting babies through this because it looks as though their brains don't like it at all. But it is an experiment that all of us are running 24/7 as we interact with people. And suddenly and unexpectedly, the buzz in our pocket is more attended to than the person in front of us. And we turn from that person and interact. So what's interesting about these experiments is that it demonstrates that the degree to which the baby recognizes this abrupt transition and doesn't like it reflects how much face-to-face interaction that baby typically has. For a child who has a lot, parents report a lot of face-to-face one-on-one interaction, the baby's brains register more of a surprise, a prediction that this is unexpected, and a sense of unhappiness. For kids who experience much less face-to-face interaction in their daily lives, now these kids are about 6 months old, they're more used to it, you might say. Their brains have predicted that, yeah, this happens all the time. I'm not expecting to be attended to. And that over the course of the experiment, babies who repeatedly get shown this sort of abrupt transition and being ignored reflect a sense of getting used to it. Now, that's probably not a very good thing, that a baby predicts that, well, regularly I'm not going to be paid attention to. The second thing that these experiments are demonstrating is that what the baby's brain is doing is not only predicting whether, she's going to be attended to or not. The baby's brain is also, as she talks, seeming to simulate in motor areas of her brain the kinds of things that the mother's doing. So if the mother's talking, this baby is reflecting a kind of simulation of what the baby's doing. So the bottom line here is the brave new world that we're facing will allow us to understand more and more why face-to-face interaction is so magical. Why is it we're all upset without it? Why are our kids not learning in schools? Why do our teens get boosts when the social interaction piece, some feedback is coming to them, even though it's not connected to what they're learning? We're going to find out what it is that makes human interaction so special, why we ought to treat it as precious. Thanks, everybody.
Unbelievable. I mean, that image, I think, says it all with that gigantic just brain interface. That was phenomenal. And I can't wait to get to the Q&A because I have so many questions about not just that gigantic machine, which I want in my house, but what you were talking about as far as learning and teens and being paid attention to. I have a preteen myself and I need some help. He's been on Zoom learning and it's not working very well. So so many questions. And I just want to remind everyone who's watching, there is a Q&A. Please put your questions in. We're going to try to get to them all. And this is so pertinent, especially people with children right now who are e-learning and parents who are e-working, and everybody's not e-paying attention to each other, right? So we really have to address some of this stuff. Pat, thank you so very much. We're going to move on to our next, but I can't wait to see you in the Q&A. So don't go anywhere. Stick around. You turn your camera off, but don't leave, and your sound off, but don't leave. Don't leave, okay? Because we're going to have Pat back in the Q&A. I don't know, but I think that was fantastic. And that was just our first one. Oh, my gosh. Talk about a bright spot of 2020. The next scientist we're going to talk to was awarded Best Staging of 2020, and I'm sure her staging is probably going to be phenomenal today, because I think when her staging all just popped up, we all leaned in to hear what she had to say. Jasmine Drake, she's a forensic scientist, and I know everybody who watches CSI thinks you could do what she could do. You can't. You have to have her experience. You have to have her acumen, and you have to have her set. Look at that set. Look at that set. There's a skull in there with a mask and something green coming out of it. Alas, poor Horatio. I knew him well. Okay, so Jasmine Drake is an assistant professor and laboratory coordinator of the Forensic Science Learning Laboratory in the Barbara Jordan Mickey Leland School of Public Affairs, Administrations of Justice Department at Texas Southern University in Houston, Texas, home of Beyonce and Jasmine Drake. She is also very passionate about introducing science, and in particular forensic science, to the youth K through 12 educators and law enforcement officials through the various hands-on forensic science workshops and training opportunities she has organized and conducted. That's a lot of words to say that Jasmine's fabulous and she knows what she's doing. And as the tape behind her says, caution, you are about to be scienced, as she's about to talk. So Jasmine, unmute. We see you. You're having a wonderful Christmas time. You have 7 minutes to forensically blow our minds. And the floor is yours.
All right. Good afternoon, everyone. So today I had to think about how would I come back? What's the encore? I mean, that's a lot of pressure. What am I going to talk about? I kind of gave a brief overview of a lot of the different projects and forensic research that I've been conducting at TSU. But today I thought about a relevant topic, and one of the research topics that I've been working on is the opioid epidemic and how it has affected the United States, and in particular minority communities across the United States. However, now we have the new pandemic, which is the COVID pandemic. And I kind of want to talk about how the COVID pandemic has affected the opioid epidemic and the relationship between the two. So when you talk about forensic science, a lot of times people think about the shows, the CSI, the hard science. However, forensic science has a critical role and should have a critical role in criminal justice reform measures. And so sometimes you hear the forensics is missing from that conversation. And so I just want to talk about a few different areas, including that opioid epidemic and different drug policies, and how those actually relate. And so, like I said, I think that judicial and legal training is very important. We've done a lot of training for judges and lawyers, and that we realize when we all get in the same room, a lot of times we don't speak the same language. And so it's very important that we're all on the same base when we're talking about, policy recommendations and things that we should do to, to better the criminal justice system. And we also look at drug policies. We have some drug policies where there has been criticism in the US that some of the drug policies have had, shown racial disparities and socioeconomic disparities. And so some of these drug policies, we need to examine those or even revisit those to look at those and the impacts that they have on certain communities. We also can think about crime scenes and different things like that. Data collection, all of that has an impact on the outcomes in criminal justice. And so I'll just talk a little bit about the public health crisis. Right now, we're going through COVID. A lot of us are isolated and indoors. And this is really having a huge impact on individuals who have substance abuse issues. So what they've been seeing is that the opioid epidemic and the number of overdoses have increased drastically since the onset of the COVID pandemic. And so opioid overdose deaths are up in 40 of the states since about March. And keep in mind, we don't have comprehensive reporting at this point. So these numbers are pretty scary. And so even the American Medical Association has put out stark warnings about these overdoses that have been increased. There have been several issues that have caused the overdose deaths to increase. So people are feeling more isolated. So where people were going to seek treatment and go to rehabilitative centers and things of that nature, those aren't open anymore. And some of the virtual, we just talked about some of the virtual settings, some of those have not been as effective for some individuals. So I just read a story about a guy, he was on the road to redemption with his opioid, abuse issue, and he wasn't able to go to treatment. And so that caused a huge issue and a huge discontinuation of his rehabilitation with the issue that he was having. And so that's one of the issues. We also don't have, a lot of times they have safe consumption sites for opioid users. Those aren't available. And also it's a problem about being isolated. So typically, if users actually have someone else around, that may prevent them from overdosing and dying. And so there are different safety measures, like there is a naloxone, if you guys have heard of the safe shot, where if someone is overdosing on an opioid, typically that's going to slow their breathing. And they usually overdose because they stop breathing. They have respiratory failure. Well, the naloxone is like pure adrenaline. And so if somebody is overdosing, if those are available, a lot of EMTs and different law enforcement agencies, they may have those on hand. So if they suspect that someone is overdosing, they can give that to the person to help them. However, if you're alone and you're isolated, someone might not be available to see you overdosing. And this is exactly what we think happened with Prince. So if you're familiar with the case, on the medical examiner's report for his death, it said that he died from fentanyl toxicity. And the cause of this was, I think he was taking opioid pills like hydrocodone or oxycodone, and they were laced with fentanyl. And so his plane had like an emergency landing the first time. They were able to probably get him to a medical facility, give him the safe shot. After that, he was at his home a few days later, and he reused, but no one was around. And so unfortunately, he passed because there was no one to administer that particular shot. And so these increases are increasing in the mid-Atlantic. So we have states like Pennsylvania, and on the East Coast, Pennsylvania, Kentucky, where they're seeing unprecedented increases in the number of opioid overdoses there. And so we really don't know the total impact that this is going to have. And so we're going to have to look very carefully, and we need to have better reporting. We need to think about some things that we can do to support people during this time, because I think Patricia talked about it a little bit. Anytime people have like mental health issues or anxiety, it's increased during a time like this. And so it's very, so it's very serious right now. And also, just in my last few seconds, I want to say that when we look at policies right now, in some jurisdictions, Good Samaritans will not even report that someone has an overdose, because defense attorneys are now prosecuting. Prosecutors are now prosecuting people for opioid overdose deaths. And so thank you, everyone. Feel free to ask some questions.
Jasmine, that was fantastic. And the thing that I really love about what you're talking about, and it's right up my alley when it comes to the macro influencing the micro, right? We don't really think about how the COVID crisis mixed with mental health issues affects another crisis that we haven't handled. And with criminal justice reform, all of those links in the chain are not being put together. And, it takes a forensic scientist to actually say something about this and put those links in the chain together to make us aware of these things. I never thought about how the opioid crisis could be ramped up because of COVID-19. That's phenomenal. I have a ton of questions, as I did with Pat. I think that's fantastic. And I would love to see an op-ed somewhere written by you about this, because as we're learning, we're going to have a rough winter, and we probably won't be back to any semblance of anything normal until late fall next year, maybe even longer. So this is going to turn into something really huge. I hope people are putting questions in the Q&A, especially for something like this. It's just phenomenal. Thank you so much, Jasmine. Like I said to Pat, you can turn off your video and you can turn off your audio, but don't go anywhere. Don't let that skull get you. Don't let him get you. I see you. As you see, she's gonna come back for Q&A. So please put your Q's in the Q's so she can A. Thank you so much, Jasmine. I always learn so much from these things. Like, I studied music and acting and filmmaking, but I think I should have been a scientist, because I get too excited. I just get so excited for all of these things. I hope it's not too late for me. What's helping me out is the Science and Entertainment Exchange and being able to do these things. That's really influencing my thinking. And I hope it's doing the same thing for you, because I love this. I could do this all day, every day. Okay, we're going to move on to our next presenter. He was voted the best visual presentation for 2020. And his name is Kevin Peter Hand. Kevin is a planetary scientist and astrobiologist at NASA's Jet Propulsion Lab, where he directs the Ocean Worlds Lab. His research focuses on the origin, evolution, and distribution of life in the solar system, with an emphasis on moons of the outer solar system that likely harbor liquid water ocean. This is a topic near and dear to me. He is the pre-project scientist for NASA's Europa Lander mission concept and was co-chair of the 2016 Europa Lander Science Definition Team. His fieldwork has brought him to Antarctica, the Arctic. Fieldwork has brought him at the depths of the Earth's oceans, the glaciers of Kilimanjaro and Mount Kenya, and the deserts of Namibia. Kevin, I love this topic. I love astrobiology. I'm so excited to hear what you're about to say. If you know of some aliens out there, just put it in the chat, but to me privately. Okay, just put it in chat. I just like to know. And then I'll see if the audience would like to know. But Kevin, turn your audio on. You're gonna have some dope slides, so everybody be prepared for that. 7 minutes. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Ahmed, and thanks so much to Anne and Rick and the team. These are always so interesting. In the previous two talks, I almost forgot that I have to give a talk. So it's wonderful just to get into different fields and hear about all of these amazing, all the amazing work. So last time I talked about alien oceans and the search for life within these oceans that we now predict exist beyond Earth, but within our own solar system. And so I'm going to share some slides here to touch on something that I love about this search that I didn't get a chance to get into last spring. And I had a book that came out April 7th, 2020. It's called Alien Oceans, The Search for Life in the Depths of Space. And I'll touch on that a bit towards the end. In some ways, a horrible time to have a book come out, in other ways, a great time. So when we talk about the search for life in our solar system, whether it's on Mars or Europa or Enceladus, these worlds beyond Earth, such as Europa and Enceladus that may have oceans, we are typically talking about the search for simple life, microbes, single-celled life. And microbes are great. I love microbes, but people always want to know about the possibility for more complex life. And this is especially true when I do consults for the Science and Entertainment Exchange. Writers and directors, they rarely want to make a movie about microbes. They want to know what kind of large, crazy-looking creatures could exist on these distant worlds that they're envisioning. So what are the prospects for more complex organisms within alien oceans of our solar system and beyond? Well, on Earth, complex life requires oxygen. And oxygen, of course, comes from photosynthesis done by plants and algae on the surface of the Earth, which then fills the atmosphere and dissolves into the ocean, where fish and other creatures can then breathe it, for example, with their gills or other mechanisms. And even this creature, an amphipod from the 11-kilometer depths of the Mariana Trench, the deepest region in our ocean, it requires oxygen dissolved in the water that comes from photosynthesis taking place on the surface of the Earth and mixing oxygen into the ocean. Microbes can eat all sorts of other things. Any larger organism such as this, and us obviously, requires oxygen. So what then are we left to conclude about the prospect for complex multicellular life on worlds like Europa? Well, or Enceladus and Titan. Well, the ice shells of these worlds are likely too thick for sunlight to drive photosynthesis, and thus it may be game over for oxygen production and the prospect of anything more than microbial life. However, Europa may have an interesting twist to this story. Europa's surface is bombarded by energetic particles, such as electrons and ions that are mixed into Jupiter's magnetic field. And these energetic particles bombard Europa's surface like a rain of irradiation. And this diagram here gives you a sense of what that looks like on the surface, charged particles coming in. And what this does on the ice is it splits apart some of the water and creates hydrogen peroxide, sulfate, and O2, molecular oxygen. And so the irradiation of Europa's surface creates oxygen that is then trapped in the ice. And if some of that ice mixes into the liquid water ocean below, then perhaps could it be game on for complex life? I like to think yes, that it could be. Of course, there's many more complex bottlenecks to the evolution of complex life, but the story of oxygen could at least be satisfied by the irradiation of Europa's surface. And so in my book, I write in detail about this chemistry, and in one of my favorite chapters, I go deep into the realm of speculation and imagine what complex life could look like and whether or not it could develop intelligence, tools, and technology. It's a chapter that I called The Octopus and the Hammer, and part of the logic there is thinking about whether or not why don't octopi use tools such as hammers, and why don't they have computers, etc. So I figured I would finish with reading just the last several paragraphs from that chapter to kind of spark your imagination. So here we go. Let me take a sip of water. And yet, despite the potential for a technologically advanced species, creatures on such a world would have no night sky to foster their sense of wonder. They might never be able to sense beyond the ice to discover the stars above. Could they ever develop the impulse to explore beyond their own planet, not having the sun or the stars to compel them into the sky? Think about what that might mean for their philosophy, their art, their music, and their concept of the meaning of life. For centuries, our gods lived among the stars. Religion and mythology on Earth have deep roots in our connection to the night sky. From the Star of Bethlehem to the daily horoscope, the night sky has long been a backdrop for our culture and civilization. Heaven is above, hell is below. Imagine being an intelligent creature within the ocean of Europa, Enceladus, or Titan, or even some ice-covered ocean elsewhere in our galaxy. The ice is too thick to allow any light to reach the ocean. No stars beckon your curiosity and motivate your mythology. Perhaps the ice creaks and cracks with a certain rhythm. Sounds from this creaking and cracking chorus form the basis of your mythology. The myths would be connected to acoustics, in other words, sounds from the cracking ice shell, instead of to light from stars above. On a world like Europa, the tidally flexed and cracking ice shell would send sounds throughout parts of the ocean, and the creatures within, if they were intelligent, would be perplexed by these sounds and the regularity of that pattern. Little would they know that Europa's sounds were connected to the massive planet Jupiter, around which Europa is tugged as it orbits every 3.5 days. And little would they know that Jupiter orbits a glowing orb of burning hot plasma once every 12 years. Nor would they know that that orb, our sun, is only one star of many billions in our galaxy, and that our galaxy is one of many billions in our universe. They would not know that nestled next to that orb is a tiny rock with a dab of water covering much of its surface. They would not know that curious creatures evolved on that rock, creatures with the ability to imagine and innovate, creatures with minds that would compel them to explore every frontier, creatures with a long-standing desire to know whether or not they are alone in the universe. In my late night gazing at the sky above, I like to imagine that within some of these alien oceans beyond Earth, there are in fact biologically and perhaps technologically advanced civilizations. Given the abundance of ocean worlds in our solar system, such worlds might be ubiquitous throughout the universe. I only hope that if they are out there, if there are intelligent creatures deep beneath the icy shells of these distant worlds, that some of them have found a way to peer through the ice and see the wonder of what lies beyond. So I'll finish there. Thanks.
Beautiful. Oh my gosh. I think the thing that I love so much about astrobiology and your book and what you're doing is the fact that you get to speculate and dream and create what it might be to be living there, right? And what's so exciting, I think, and then this is why I love, you know, NASA, JPL, the space program, anybody going out there. I think what's so exciting is we get to do that. We get to stand on the shore, look out and say, let's go there. I want to go there. Let's see what happens. You know, let's see who's out there. Let's see if we can talk to somebody. Let's see if they'll talk back. That kind of stuff is just, it keeps you going, keeps you alive, it keeps you excited. And it keeps you curious, which is, you know, one of the biggest things that I love. Kevin, thank you so much for that. And so well written. What's the, give us the title of the book once again, really quickly.
Alien Oceans.
Alien Oceans. We're going to talk more about that in the Q&A because there's some really great questions coming in from the Q&A for that. And of course, I got some too. That you can hope to answer. And thank you for telling me about the aliens. I mean, sorry, I won't share our private conversation. Thank you, Kevin. He'll be back. So the next speaker is going to be our most evocative of 2020. And this one was really special. It was told in a very first person narrative, and it was told about the front lines of what's going on in our world today. And it was incredibly emotional for anyone who watched it. It was amazingly emotional for me, especially since I have family members who are on the front lines as healthcare workers and healthcare professionals dealing through this crisis. So there was a whole bunch of thank yous and appreciative words after the first 7 minutes of Cinda Rushton. And I'm so happy that you get another 7 minutes because what you said was so incredibly important. I'm just going to read down some of your creds. Cinda Rushton is the Anne and George L. Bunting Professor of Clinical Ethics in the Berman Institute of Bioethics and the School of Nursing at Johns Hopkins University. An international leader in nursing ethics. Her current scholarship in clinical ethics focuses on moral distress and suffering of clinicians, the development of moral resilience, designing a culture of ethical practice, and conceptual foundations of integrity, respect, trust, and compassion. Cinda, you are definitely a model for all of those things, and I'm so happy to see you again. And I'm looking forward to your 7 minutes. The Cinda, is yours.
Thank you so much. I want to continue the conversation that we started in April about the plight of clinicians. And I wish I could tell you that it's changed a lot, because in many ways it hasn't. I referred to the experience, and if you want to put the slide up, of the nurse in the critical care unit, now 9 months later, has been working so many shifts. Your body just aches. And I think this image from this Iranian cartoonist really reflects what many clinicians feel. That incredible commitment to our patients. We go above and beyond for our patients, but we are drowning. We're really, truly drowning. And if you think about what's happened over these months, clinicians and nurses and doctors have often witnessed more death than they've experienced in their entire career. And right now, even with the hope of the vaccine on the horizon, the numbers of patients diagnosed and dying with COVID every day is so alarming that in many ways, we're back to where we were in April, holding our breath and worrying about whether or not we're going to get to crisis standards of care. And many, many clinicians right now are wondering, how much more can I carry? It's like having a house on fire, watching it burn, waiting for the fire truck, and all you have is the fire extinguisher. And you think, hold on a little longer, help is coming. Well, It's coming, but at what cost? It's interesting because over these last months, in the beginning, everyone was clapping and cheering, holding up clinicians as heroes. But what's shifted in the last few months is now, for some, they've been cast as the enemy. Patients are arriving in our hospitals and in our critical care units, being diagnosed with COVID and arguing with their clinicians about their diagnosis, accusing them of lying, of being part of a conspiracy to inflate the numbers. And all the while, as a clinician watching a person deteriorate, arguing with you instead of being on FaceTime with their family when they are becoming more and more sick, requiring a breathing machine. As one of my nurse colleagues said from North Dakota, we take care of everybody, no matter who you voted for, what you do for a living, with the same skill and expertise and compassion. And to have our patients suggest that our intentions are somehow corrupt is really demoralizing and adds to that sense of despair and discouragement. These are cumulative betrayals, and some people have described this process of death by 1,000 cuts, and it creates morally injurious wounds that will not be healed quickly or easily. And our research team is looking into these questions, trying to understand what are the factors that contribute to these situations of clinicians. And like everything, there's another side to this story. So if you could go to the next slide. One of the things that my work is focused on is, what is it that allows people to meet these challenges in ways that preserves their integrity, that allows them to really be who they are and not be disabled by the crush of all of these issues. So our team has been looking at how moral resilience actually moderates some of these factors. Nurses and doctors have shown up over and over and over again to meet these challenges. And I want to just share a tiny story that was shared with me by one of my critical care colleagues. She shared with me about a gentleman who had been in their unit for about 3 months, had been diagnosed with COVID, had a very common course where it's sort of up and down, and many times the team wasn't sure if he was going to actually make it out of the unit, but he did. He persisted. Every time he sort of rallied. He finally got to the point where he could get his breathing tube out, which meant that soon after he would be able to eat something. Well, the nurses and doctors tried their best to get something that he would eat, and he kept refusing. All he wanted was food that his wife had cooked. So after a really frustrating day of trying to get this gentleman to eat, one of the nurses huddled with her colleagues and said, "We've got to figure out a way to get his wife here." And as you all know, we've been on lockdown. The only instances where families can visit often is at the end of life. And this was a gentleman who was living, who needed his family to be there. So they got creative and innovative, as we often do. The charge nurse partnered with the security guard at the entrance, went down, met the wife, did her COVID checks, brought her up to the unit. And the nurse caring for the patient had gone into his room, turned the lights on. It was in the evening. He was objecting. "Why are you turning the lights on?" And she said, "Just wait." And in a moment, there was a knock on the window. They looked, and there was his wife, waving madly, making gestures of hugs and kisses, taking her fingers and making hearts. And the gentleman was so shocked. Tears started flowing down his face. And after a few minutes of exchange, it was time for her to leave. And he turned to his nurse and said, "This is a miracle." This is the kind of incredible reservoir of compassion and service that our clinicians are demonstrating. So as we think about what's ahead, I think that we must consider, what does it mean to heal from this pandemic? Not fixing or consoling, but really what will it take to heal so that clinicians are not put in these untenable circumstances ever again? What are our most essential resources in healthcare? What do organizations and society owe to those who have taken on disproportionate burden during this pandemic? What does the investment in the well-being of clinicians actually look like? How will we address the residue, the moral residue, and the persistent moral suffering that has occurred? And if that isn't enough for you personally, consider who will care for you if our healthcare workforce is decimated in the process of this pandemic. All of us have a stake in thinking about how we can collectively honor the service of our colleagues, to listen to protect and empower those at the front lines who have made such incredible sacrifices over these days. Thank you.
So incredibly powerful, poignant, and necessary for this time. I would love to ask everyone to come back for the Q&A, but Cinda, I'd love to ask you a question about what you're talking about, specifically how we care for those who care for us. And we tend to have this disconnect because we feel like they should be serving us, right? When in actuality, they're helping us survive. What can those of us do now when it comes to thinking about future pandemics and healthcare workers? Where can we start putting our energy, our imagination, our thought processes when it comes to that?
Great question. And I'm going to start real simply, that has to do with science. We have to follow science. If I've heard one clinician say it once, I've heard it 5,000 times. Please wear a mask, wash your hands, socially distance, get tested, and get the vaccine. Because if we do not follow those science-based recommendations, we will continue to have these kinds of pandemics that will overwhelm our healthcare system. The second thing is, I think we all have to advocate at every level that we have available to us, whether you're a patient, whether you are in a position of leadership, to allocate resources to actually provide support and resources for people at the front lines. Make it possible for them to have access to mental health services. Make it possible for them to have resources, including appropriate staffing, so that they can do their jobs, to have PPE so that they don't have to take these unprecedented risks. So that'd be a place where I'd start.
Yeah, absolutely. So necessary. Thank you all for rejoining us. There are so many wonderful questions in the chat. I hope I get to a lot of them, but I'm just going to go in. I'm going to just start. And this first question is for Pat from Joshua. Can you tell us about the difference between girl and boy brains? Joshua has 3 daughters. And what should, he says, what should I know that most parents don't know as it relates to social learning? Also, knowing what we know, how can we improve distance learning better using our new knowledge? And I would love to add to that as well, because I think I had a thought as you were talking about, I have a young boy and learning, and how can we also make distance learning effective, even though we're not, because that's our only choice right now. We know that peer learning and learning in person is definitely ideal, but because we are here now, what can we do to make distance learning or e-learning effective enough so that our children don't feel as if they're losing something by not being there in person?
Right. Okay. So let's start with the difference between the girls and the boys. So early in development, you don't see as many differences. When you look at those young kids under 2 and their reliance on social others, their attention to social others, it's intense in both of them. In the boys and the girls, the little ones who are in the meg machine and parents or others turn away from them suddenly, you get the same kind of upset in both of them. So I think we start out on that level playing field, depending on this human interaction for not just the emotional support we need, but for learning and cognition, because it's understanding other people is how we learn. We're natural teachers, and our minds are based on the ability to kind of read others, right? So then you think about this distance learning phenomenon, and the fact that at all ages, kids need social interaction. So even in our teenage study, you can see it, how it boosted having some social stimulus as feedback for an irrelevant piece of information that they were automatically learning, boosted learning. And so there we saw a difference in how much they depended on either faces or emojis. Girls seem to be more dependent on faces, and their interest in faces goes up as their social media use goes down. They're kind of face people. They're not like social media people. The boys who are linked to learning is linked to emojis. The more social media use, their emoji learning goes up. So there are linkages to the degree to which they depend on social media. So it was, very interesting. And we're still delving into the data. This is all unpublished so far. So finally, what do we do about distance learning? I think we tell the kids that it's hard. We talk to them. You should spend time with each of your kids, 10 minutes, 15 minutes, face to face, turn off the phones and say, how are you doing? I know it's hard. Your brain needs your friends. What can we do? Do you want to Skype one-on-one with, Frank, Henry, your best friend? Do you want to, we know it's not the best, but maybe you can play a joint game while you're both on. And maybe you can talk about what's going on in school together. We've got studies that show hands down when kids learn together, part of the reason the social is so important is not only that we use social information to see what others are looking at and read their intentions. The mere presence of a second baby improves learning in the babies. Even if they aren't teaching each other anything, sitting by each other, it makes a difference. So those hormones, this stuff, neurotransmitters are different. So to try to tell kids about their brains, we know this is going to be hard. It'll get better. We'll get out of this. And the positive spin I could put on it is I think we're going to see a bounce effect. One of the things you do when you take away something from us is that we really learn how important it is that those hugs, those, holding hands, those things we do with our friends, the little kids, I think they're going to cling to each other like never before. If we can measure the oxytocin, will be flowing in their brains. That's the love hormone. I mean, I really think that we're going to see a bounce effect and that we could come back understanding more and more about why our social brains rule the world.
I'm here for that. I mean, one of the best things I love is when kids who haven't seen each other in a long time just embrace. It's just a wonderful thing, and it just warms your heart. And it, if you don't feel anything from that, there's something wrong with you, because it's just beautiful. It's just a beautiful thing to see. Beautiful. This question is for Jasmine from Lucy. How is the development of standards in forensic science impacting the quality of forensic science? The NAS questioned in 2009. What is the status related to improvement of the quality of forensic analysis?
Oh, that's a very good question. So since 2009, I think Lucy is referring to the NAS report, which is pretty much a scathing report in forensics. And it really put forensic science under the magnifying glass. And it said that we needed to do better. And so this was, of course, after that, the J Simpson Trial and other cases like that, where they saw.
You talked about this in your first talk.
So many things went awry. And so, they were saying testimony, the expert testimony. We had people who were on the stand in certain areas, especially for the comparison methods such as bite mark analysis, fingerprint, latent print analysis, where the testimonies, maybe they were outside of the scope of what they should be testifying. We had people who didn't have the correct credentials. We had some of the methods that were not, scientifically proven to do the things that the experts were saying on the stand. And so we had to come up with some recommendations to do better, And so one role that I have is on the Texas Forensic Science Commission. And so my role on that commission is to look at practices in the field, especially in the state of Texas. And we look at all of the accredited labs. We look at any type of non-compliance issues, any things that are going on in the lab where someone may be doing some unethical things or some misconduct. And we're able to give rulings, recommendations, and things like that. And so over time, we're increasing the quality in forensic science, at least we hope we are. And so we're making recommendations on different areas. So it used to be a time, just for example, like in bite mark analysis, someone would get on the stand and say, this bite mark matched, and we don't even like to use the word matched anymore. He had to shake his head on that. So we don't use matched anymore. So so you have some jurors sitting there and they're like, okay, so this is an expert, this is the person. And they found out that I think they did some tests of bite mark analysis analysts, and they found out they were getting it wrong 50% of the time. So
what is and this is from me, what is the thing that forensic scientists know that you wish the public should know more to help us just really organize in our brains why certain things are happening, right? Like, is there a piece of information that never gets out to the public that you wish the public would know as part of the process of forensic analysis? Because there's been a lot of talk about injustice happening. There's been a lot of talk about what's criminal and what's not criminal. And unfortunately, we don't get all the information in the sound bites, right? And there's something that forensic scientists know that go, well, this is why this didn't happen, right? We don't know those things. So if there is, what is that piece of information that we need to know that would help us rationalize why something isn't being called a crime?
I think one major thing would be interpretation. So for a lot of results, you may have someone who's testifying on a particular result, and that may be their interpretation, of a particular issue. And I'll give an example. So there are crime scenes where someone is found, they're dead, they have drugs in their system. However, it doesn't mean that the drugs were the cause of death. Mm-hmm. And so I've talked to some experts in the field, and they said even with the, we saw, unfortunately, everybody saw the video footage of George Floyd. Mm-hmm. Well, when they actually ran the toxicology report, he actually had fentanyl, which is one of those synthetic opioids that we say is extremely dangerous. He had that in his system, but that wasn't the cause of death. We saw, in real time, we actually saw what happened. And so those are the types of things that forensic analysts and the public should be aware of, is knowing that it's about the interpretation. So even with the crime scene, there's going to be some interpretation that's actually happening. So I think that education is not just, you want to think it's just black and white because it's hard science, but there is some interpretation even for crime scenes and things like
Absolutely. That's a fantastic answer. Kevin, this is for you. We had 2 Drake equation questions. Here's one from Joshua. How has our discovery of exoplanets changed our understanding of the Drake equation and the probability for complex life in other corners of the universe? And the Kinders had the same question about the Drake equation.
Yeah, it's a great question. And the short answer directly to exoplanets and the Drake equation is that within the Drake equation, and just as a brief summary of what that is for folks who don't live and breathe this stuff, it's a way to come up with a rough order of magnitude of the number of intelligent, technologically advanced communicating civilizations within our galaxy. And so there are a bunch of different parameters that you just rack up. And so the discovery of exoplanets has helped us refine what's called F sub P, the fraction of solar systems that have planets. And of course, one of the amazing advances in astronomy and planetary science over the past, now I guess 3 decades, we could call it, is that most stars do appear to have planets. Now, whether or not they have Earth-like planets or more Neptune-like planets, that's still a topic of search and discovery as we get better telescopes and tools, we can do better counting of which planets are where and why. But when it comes to worlds like Europa and Enceladus, part of what I like to emphasize is that if you add up the volume of liquid water of the oceans beyond Earth, it could well be in excess of about 50 times the volume of liquid water we find in Earth's oceans. That's an incredible amount of real estate just in our own backyard. And so, and these moons, these ice-covered ocean worlds are not that hard to make. There's no fancy atmosphere with an ocean on the surface and continents and all that. They're relatively abundant and easy to make. So I think Europas could be ubiquitous, and oceans beneath ice out there in the galaxy could be some of the most habitable real estate in our galaxy. And as per that reading that I gave, then the question is, could intelligence and technology truly develop under such conditions? And we've just got to go and explore.
Do astrobiologists have some sort of quantifier for intelligent life?
A quantifier. Where are you going with this, Ahmed? I feel like this may actually have to do with planet Earth. What's the?
Yeah, I mean, you could, but is there a way that you guys could, if you do find life on these exoplanets, how do you know it's intelligent life?
Right, and so it's interesting because with microbial life and sort of simple life forms, we have a pretty thorough and debated way of thinking about what are called biosignatures, signs of life, and there's this thing called the ladder of life that the NASA astrobiology program has put together, and that says things like look for organics, look for cell-like structures, all these different things. When it comes to intelligent life, in some ways that might actually be a bit easier, because that would be a signal that somebody like Jill Tarter up at the SETI Institute, who's Jodie Foster's character in Contact was modeled after her. You get that radio signal, and there's just no way to explain it with anything other than a technologically advanced civilization beyond Earth. It would be kind of hard to have a truly ambiguous message like signal coming in. There are phenomena like pulsars once were that confuse us for a period of time, but eventually we figure out that they are not containing detailed information in the form of a message.
Perfect. Beautiful. Thank you. That was just for me because I wanted to know if I needed to talk to some extraterrestrials. We got time for one more question. Thank you, Kevin. We got time for one more question, and this is for Pat and or Cinda from Julie. How do we balance the risks of contagion against the risks of isolation? Is it possible to more finely fine-tune our response to public health challenges related to infection so that we don't create an eco-pandemic of despair and isolation? It's a really great question for the both of you.
So Cinda, why don't you take the first nod at this?
Well, it's a great question because we have seen the consequences of this exact question in our visitation policies. And we have seen the isolation of clinicians, that picture that I shared, nurses are inside the room and everybody else is outside. And families need to be together. So I think we are now pausing to rethink what is a better balance. It can't just be all one way. And it also has to take into account that there are unintended consequences that are profound for both clinicians and patients and families. And I don't think we have any idea of what the long-term consequences are going to be for all of us in this regard. And I'm so glad that Pat's doing work on this so that maybe we can really heal from this isolation.
I thought it was so moving, Cinda, the glass where they were writing on it. I mean, because you can bring social one step closer by seeing, by touching, by writing, by blowing a kiss, by hearing. I've heard of all kinds of stories where tape recordings and pictures have been brought to people in the ICU who are dying, singing, a spouse singing. brings tears to your eyes. So I think what we do is go to the edge, do everything that we can, and then just the human understanding that we're all suffering because of this. I think we'll build resilience about the value of protecting our social interaction, protecting human interaction, valuing it for all of us at all ages and levels of society.
I agree.
Wonderful. And I value you all. You know, when I was a kid, you know, I grew up in the South Bronx in New York City and didn't have very much. And, you know, the ability to have dreams, the ability to think about the future, that was a currency that I didn't think I could afford. That was something that was audacious to do because you're thinking about the right now all the time, which is why I really love talking about the future. And, you know, my podcast, the Afrofuturist podcast, is about the future because dreaming was a commodity that I couldn't buy as a kid. And it was actually embarrassing to be the daydreamer that I was, you know what I'm saying? Because it was an audacious thing. And the thing that I love about listening to all of you, and the thing that I love about science in general, is the method, the practice, the process. It gives you this excuse for exploration. Mm-hmm. It gives you this vehicle to search for things, even if it's not a physical vehicle. It's an imagination. It's an imaginative vehicle to search for things. And it helps you organize your dreams. Mm-hmm. It gives you this audacity. It gives you the license to be audacious when it comes to dreaming. And that audacity leads to hope. And I think every single one of you today have given me hope, especially when it comes to how we are going to face our near and distant future from here in our hospitals with our healthcare workers, from inside to our brains, to figuring out what we as a society is consider fair or unfair, and even communicating with those beyond the shores of Earth's orbit and into the exoplanet. So I'd love to thank you all for this year. Every exchange event has lifted my spirits, and this is no different. You are all wonderful human beings, and I appreciate you all. I would love to bring Anne and Rick back. They are two wonderful human beings that I care for a great deal. Thank you so much for letting me be a part of this. Thank you so much for letting me have a voice amongst all of these people who are so much smarter than me. I appreciate it. I appreciate the learning. And thank you for letting me share this amount of time and be your host. I appreciate you.
Listen, we are all so happy that you're here. And so this is, I guess, our moment where we wanted to give you a small gift of our appreciation without sending you a paperweight, something that might actually be a little practical, and that we want to thank you for helping us spread science this year, because that's what you did for us. So this is the moment where we all have our masks and we're ready to go to spread science on behalf of the Science and Entertainment Exchange. And this is, I think it's going to be the moment that everyone says, it was the year we wore masks all year round. So thank all of you for being here. Thank you everyone in our audience for doing this. And we're coming back next year, and we'll have more amazing people like the lineup today. So thank you all, and have a wonderful holiday season. And we will see you in January 2021.